Welcome to the Calm Podcast, where we talk about insight to help you on your personal growth journey. I'm your host, Omar Albaga. Welcome to episode 1. In this episode, we're going to be covering a book entitled Yes to Life in Spite of Everything by Viktor Frankl. So the main point of this book is that every life has meaning, and it's not by the pursuit of pleasure, but by the duty that life bestows upon you. So let's talk about that a little bit. So Viktor Frankl originally wrote a book entitled Man's Search for Meaning, and that was his, claim to fame. Viktor Frankl was a survivor of the Holocaust who endured extreme, trials and tribulations and lived to speak about how he found meaning even during the worst of times, even during, the Holocaust time. So he has insights to share. Now, this book called Yes to Life is talks he gave, and then that was turned into a book after his release of The Man's Search to Meaning. So he talks about there being so much pessimism around the time of war and around the time of the Holocaust, that everybody was pessimistic about life. People just didn't believe life had any meaning. And there were constant debates, and it was just a controversial topic. If you ever spoke about life having meaning, people were like, oh, life has no meaning, there's no point. Because at a time of war and a time of Holocaust, you can imagine, similar to the situation of the pandemic where, you're put into this test that kind of everything is tested. All your beliefs and everything you believe about life becomes tested. So that's what happened during the times of war. And people were just being used as tools. So during pre-Holocaust, it was that man's total work was simply a means to an end. The man's work was just a tool to be used for economic empowerment, and nothing else mattered. They were just being used to produce a greater economy for the whole. That was pre-Holocaust. Then during the Holocaust, life itself didn't matter because they were killing Jewish people, and there was this war at the time of the Holocaust. So life itself was basically devalued and had no meaning. And to the point that even what Frankl was saying was that even the life that they considered that it wasn't even worth living, that it was worth death, they would still use that life to put it to work until the end, until it died. So it was a horrible situation. He talks about how they were given even their soup of the day, their one meal or something like that, and they would have to remove their hats in thanks of getting that soup, even though they were degraded, even though that they were considered worthless human beings who deserved to die. And there was even they wouldn't, in the mental institutions, they didn't even allow people who were mentally sick to live. They didn't believe in the value of their life. So he goes on to present that the pessimism around the meaningfulness of life exists, and that's something that we're going to have to constantly debate. The second point is the purpose of life is not about having fun. So that is the next point that Viktor Frankl wants to discuss, is that the purpose of life is not about having fun in and of itself, but it's about the duty that life bestows upon you. There has been a Russian psychologist who talks about life being that there's more dissatisfaction at large than satisfaction. That if you were to look at life in general, people will go through many modes, many experiences of being dissatisfied. And you could look at this in your own life. Life is not just going to be perfect and it's all going to be good. And that in many cases, there's more dissatisfaction than there could be joy and satisfaction. And that's something that may be common in life. He goes on to give an example. Imagine there was a prisoner who is going to be condemned to death, and they are given the choice of the last meal. They're given the choice to decide on the meal that they would have as the last meal of their life, whatever they want to have, even though they're going to, die in whatever, next 24 hours. And the prisoner says, there's no point to this. I don't want to eat anything. There's no point to have this meal because I'm just going to die, in the next whatever. So in this example, what Frankl is saying is that if this person's perspective was correct, then truly life has no meaning. Because everyone is going to face that. Everyone is not going to live forever, right? So everyone is going to be put in that situation, whether it is tomorrow, the next day, 10 years from now, 50 years from now. Those are things that every human being will face. Maybe not in such an urgent manner, but it's going to exist. So if we were to just say, well, then there's no point, because in the end, we're going to go. So what's the point of me choosing this meal? What he's trying to say is that it's as if basically this person is looking at the total meaning of life based on that pleasure. That, you know what, there's no point, because if I can't have this one pleasurable thing, then what's the point of everything? But what he's saying is that perception is wrong, because you're looking at the total meaning of life to be based around that pleasure principle, that pleasurable moment, that one moment of joy that you want it to become the meaning of life. Based on that pleasure, it can't give meaning, because you're not always going to have that. So how can you possibly base your entire meaning of life on these pleasurable moments? And on the flip side, if the pleasure doesn't give you the meaning, then lack of pleasure doesn't equate to lack of meaning. So what Frankl is saying is that this concept that we search through, pleasure only, when life gives you way more than that, it's not something you can consider, because life gives you joy, pain, happiness, anger, gives you everything. Pleasure is one part of it. So you can't take all of that and say the meaning has to be based on that. So in that case, lack of pleasure has nothing to do with the lack of meaning of life. That has nothing to do with it. And there's a poem I actually thought was really interesting from this book I wanted to read. And it goes like this. It is by a poet called Tagore. I slept and dreamt that life was joy. I awoke and saw that life was duty. I worked and behold, duty was joy. What Frankl is expressing is that life is really duty, and that the joy sprouts from this duty, that you cannot pursue, like the pursuit of the joy and the happiness. It cannot be the end, the goal that is being sought, except that pleasure and joy sprouts from the moments of interacting with life. Doing the duties of life comes this joy. Essentially, life happens in a spontaneous fashion. Life is not something that can be controlled. He goes on to discuss a man and woman who were saying, life is not going to do anything for me. I can't expect anything from life. But then later on, they discovered this woman ended up realizing she had a child who was living in another country that she had to take care of, and that was something new. And this person, the man, ended up having like a scientific career. He didn't, kind of just came out of nowhere. So the point is that a lot of times when we sit down and say, life, we can't get anything from life. We can't expect anything from life. The truth is that you have to flip it. It's not what you expect of life. What Frankl says, life expects from you. It's not that you that seek the meaning. Life seeks meaning from you. That concept by itself will completely flip your world around to the positive if you can look at things like that. Don't ask life the questions, but he's saying life asks you the questions. Life makes demands of you. Life seeks meaning from you. And your response to what life bestows upon you and commands of you and demands of you, that is what will create the meaning of life. Just that, and the joy and the happiness and whatever comes of that will just come spontaneously. That by itself, I think, is an extraordinary belief. The next point that Frankl makes is that meaning can only be made in the present through action. So he actually debases, or he prioritizes action over mere words, because there are people who will have the most amazing quotes on their walls, but they'll never live those quotes. They'll never act on those quotes. So the mere, writing of the words or the presenting of words is not enough. but that action is what drives people and what creates the meaning. And it's in the present moment. We know nothing of the future. The future, we can only live based on what is in front of us now, because we don't know what's going to be in the future. Life is going to be spontaneous, and how we act in those moments is what is going to give us the meaning. There was a story that was being told in this book where there was a black man who was imprisoned and in chains, and they had to go on a boat ride to take him to this island where the prison was. Now, if you were to ask that person what's the meaning of life in that moment, who knows what they'll respond. But what happened on this journey was that there was an extreme storm. There was a very severe storm that people were, killed people. And this prisoner, they actually unchained him because they needed all the power, they needed all the manpower they could get at that moment to, get through this storm. He ended up saving 10 people on that boat. He saved 10 lives. And what happened was, after that, they ended up pardoning him because of that great deed that he did. So Frankl asked the question, if you were to ask that man, would life have meaning before he would go on that boat ride to go to his impending doom of prison for life? Most likely the answer would be no. But little did he know what was waiting for him on the other side. Little did he know what life would throw at him that would allow him to respond with such amazing action and create this meaning that actually ended up freeing him. So in that same sense, in that regard, we don't know what the future holds. And there's no point to thrust the meaning of life towards the future, but that it has to be lived in the present. And that the expectation of the future should just not be there, because you have no idea what that's going to bring. It may be positive, and it's how you act on it. The question that people ask, right, is what's the meaning of life? But Frankl is saying that question by itself is not a good question, because the meaning of life changes by the hour, by the person, by the time period. And it changes throughout your life, and it changes for you depending on the moment. He says it's like asking, go to a chess player and say, what's the best chess move? If anyone knows how to play chess, or we could say football, what's the best football move? But the truth is, if you were to play this sport, you realize that there's so many different plays that have to be done at different times depending on what's happening in the moment. You can't play the same play. That best play won't be the best play every time. So what he's saying was, when you say, what's the meaning of life? It's a simple question that is not in its place, because the meaning of life will change depending on what life is bestowing upon you in the moment. Whatever you're going through right now is what you're going to make meaning of, and how you act in that moment is what's going to give you the meaning. There's one other point that I wanted to make, which is he talks about the circle of life. There's people who point the finger and say, it's easy for you to say you're rich, you have a mansion, you have this fancy car, you have this, you have that. Little old me, I have nothing. What do I have? But what Frankl says is that imagine that life is a circle that is unique to you. Every individual has a circle of life that they have to fill that's unique to them. It doesn't matter how big the circle is. It may be large, it may be small, but there's a dot in the middle, and how much you cover of that circle is your meaning of life. So someone might have a huge life, a huge circle, but they're only shaded this much of the circle, even though it seems to be more, but they're not fulfilled. So if you want fulfillment and meaning, fill your circle. Whatever life is bestowing upon you, whatever demands life is making of you in your circle, if you live that to the most and you shade as much as you can and you consume as much as you can of that circle that you know that you have, you'll have the utmost fulfillment and meaning of life more than anyone else, because it's unique to you. So you can never be in a situation saying, I don't have this, look at that. It's what you make of what you have in your life, in your circle. And there's little things people overlook. like the care with others, the connection with family, the connection with friends, different things they could do to help the world, different things they can do in their own circle, no matter what it is, no matter how big or small. The more you do there, it empowers you. And finally, everyone can make their own meaning depending on their own situations. And that life in and of itself can give meaning in so many different ways. How many times have we been involved with the arts, with nature, with just sitting with a friend, and you're like, you know what? Everything of life, all that matters is that moment. You saw some beautiful show, and that moment gave you life. That moment gave meaning that you can extrapolate that if that's the right word, meaning out of these amazing moments that you see. So the truth is that you are in complete control with your actions, and that through these actions they will give you meaning. And that is the first part of Viktor Frankl's book. Say yes to life in spite of everything. I hope you've enjoyed this. This has been episode 1. Please like and subscribe for more insights and more reviews of amazing books that can help you live a better and more empowered life.